What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of The Barbaric Yawp. I am your host, Adam, and today I wanted to talk to you about what I observe in our society related to this COVID-19 pandemic. More or less, the issue that I see is that we are abdicating our responsibility as individuals to the expertise of supposed individuals in our government that are I guess more of an expert or more willing to be the figurehead of the decisions that are made. So, for example, shelter in place. That was a decision made by certain high-level individuals, and then it was forced upon everybody else, and everybody else pretty much just took it. Very little objection, very little whatever. They suspended the right to assemble. They told churches they couldn't operate. They told businesses they had to shut down unless they were deemed essential. Ironically, all of the big box stores like Walmart and Home Depot and Lowe's and whatnot seemed to stay active. But little mom and pop's gyms, little mom and pop's restaurants, most restaurants, in fact, were closed down. Sort of arbitrarily, in my opinion, on the whims of individuals were assuming far too much power. This is an issue, okay? Man was created basically with a fundamental right and responsibility to exist, to provide for his own existence. He wasn't created and told everything will be provided for you. He wasn't, brought up suckling on, the teat of God, if you will, just living off of the sweet nectar that he provided. He had to work. He had things he had to do. He had responsibilities to himself and to others to exist in relationship, to communicate with God. If we go back to the Garden of Eden, this is one of the things that I think personally, when we talk about original sin, a lot of people talk about pride or selfishness or whatever, and I'm not sure that sin can be diced up into neat little things, but I would argue that original sin was abdicating responsibility, was giving up the responsibility of existing and providing for your own existence and working and acting as a responsible individual. Adam abdicated that right, tried to blame it on Eve, said, Eve, the woman you brought here, she said it. Ultimately, the choice was between stay in the garden with responsibility, naming animals, taking care of the garden, taking care of the animals, and communing and having a relationship with God. Man may have been perfect in the Garden of Eden, perfectly man, not perfect or complete in relationship, understanding, knowledge. In fact, I would argue that's why God had Adam name the animals, is because he wanted to show Adam aspects of God's character that he wouldn't have otherwise known. It was a responsibility. It was part of the agreement, the existence that Adam had. He abdicated that responsibility by choosing, instead of to learn from God and do the work that it took to learn from God and be in relationship with God and with Eve, he took the tree of knowledge, the shortcut to get information and knowledge that he wouldn't have otherwise had. I see that happening in our society right now. It shouldn't surprise us that tyranny exists. It shouldn't surprise us that evil exists. That's a foregone conclusion, in my estimation. What we're surprised by now is that it's actually active. It's actually moving. It's moving against free men to try and subjugate them. It's moving against the pursuit of happiness, life, in exchange for security. You're losing freedom for security, and it's an imaginary security at that. Everybody's now has to wear masks. Everything's trying to open back up, and they're trying to do that by limiting the numbers of people, making them stay 6 feet apart, and wearing masks. Now, the CDC has flopped back and forth on whether or not masks are worth it. In fact, Dr. Fauci, the supposed head of the task force to deal with this pandemic, has said back in March that masks, unless you're wearing the N95 mask and you're a medical professional, masks really don't do much for you. In Asian countries, they wear masks out of courtesy and respect when they're sick to protect those individuals that might otherwise be infected. We here have decided that we're going to wear masks all the time and that there's going to be a social pressure to do so, which I don't understand. I really don't. It seems as though we have just thrown our hands up, given up, decided, hey, my rights, my responsibilities, my freedom are too much for me to handle, so I'm going to let somebody else in the government, somebody else with a title or with a PhD or with a position, take that responsibility from me, and I'm just going to give my life over to him. The problem is this: you can't get rid of that responsibility. It's not possible. You may try and blame somebody else for your problems, but ultimately you are responsible for your life. Ultimately, you're the one that makes the decision to follow that person. So fundamental responsibility still lies with you to make that decision. You cannot abdicate your responsibility to exist. Now, I've been reading this book, Common Sense by Thomas Paine. It's a fantastic book. Kind of the original argument for why we need government and what government's supposed to be. I have this fantastic quote here that I will read to you. It is literally like the first or second sentence in this book. Society is produced by our wants, and government by our wickedness. There's a lot more there. This is a fantastic book. You should definitely read this book. Government only exists because we don't choose to be responsible. We don't choose to act like adults. We don't choose to do the right thing and be responsible for ourselves, for those around us, for our communities, for our families. We choose not to be responsible for that stuff. That requires that the government step in and fill the gap. Huge, huge problem. Obviously, the government is there to provide for our defense. And he goes on to describe how the original governments may have been formed. That, you know, a little group of people got together and they couldn't survive on their own, so they helped each other out, raising their barns together and working together. But as they grew, their families grew, there became more and more people. Instead of all of them voting on something that was just inconvenient, so they abdicated their vote to a representative. That's how we ended up with a representative government. But a fundamental argument was that those representatives can't have interests on their own. They have to be subject to the same rules and the same laws and the same needs and issues that the rest of their congregants or what do you call them? Citizens, I guess, that they represent. They have to have those same concerns and those same issues. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. It doesn't make any sense. Doesn't sound like the country we have today. Our representatives are far away, detached. Most of our major government officials, I would argue, don't even live by the same rules that we do. They're not worried about balancing budgets the way we are. They're not worried about having to go out and earn a paycheck. In fact, maybe that's why they're okay with closing things down, is they get paid regardless. This is what I want to encourage you to do, okay? As a responsible human being, as an adult, as a man, you are responsible for your life. You cannot abdicate that to anybody else. You can't abdicate it to your wife. You can't abdicate it to your parents. You can't put the responsibility on your kids. You are responsible for your life. It's not easy. It's a pain in the butt sometimes, but you are responsible. And to the greater degree that you can accept responsibility, the more responsibility you accept, the greater man you will be. Thanks for watching this episode. It's kind of just a rant based on a video that I saw today. Another example of tyranny happening. police, I would argue, unlawfully busted into a private small business and told the customers they had 5 minutes to leave or they would all be fined the owner, told him he couldn't open his business, and so he couldn't pay his employees, he couldn't run his business and provide for his family. And that's just scratching the surface. I'll put a link to the video in the description here, but this is just another example of when people abdicate their responsibility to do the right thing, to be responsible citizens, to be responsible human beings. Government's gonna step in and they're gonna overreach. And that's gonna happen over and over and over again when we don't take responsibility for our own lives and for our own communities and for our own families. There's no such thing as a free lunch. There's no such thing as not having to bear responsibility. No matter where you are and what you're doing in life, you will always have responsibility. You will always. You cannot get away from it. You might suspend it for your children. You bear the responsibility that they should have, but that may be weakening your children in the long run. We should teach our kids to be strong, to own their lives, to own their responsibilities. That would be creating functioning adults capable of stepping in, stepping up, leading when they need to, and doing the right thing. Anyway, thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you guys, and we'll see you next time.